Some of you might remember it was back in the 1960s, I think, there was a television show called That Was the Week That Was. And that show satirized current events at the time, and in many ways, I suppose it was a precursor to Saturday Night Live and The Daily Show. Well, what we are beginning this morning commemorates the ultimate week that was. And I want to take just a moment or two to invite you to think about what these days ahead mean to us. So imagine for a moment a group of Christians gathered to celebrate Eucharist, maybe about 10 years or so after the death and resurrection of Jesus. They would have read from the Old Testament as we just did from the prophet Isaiah. None of the Gospels or other books of the Old Testament had yet been written. So they told stories about what Jesus said and what Jesus did. And the story that they told the most and the earliest was the story of his suffering and death. And we know that because the narratives are so similar in all four of the Gospels. This story took shape very early because it was repeated so often. And by the time the Gospels were written, the spoken account of this story had a fairly set form. And we might legitimately wonder why this is the part of his life that they would talk the most about. Why not talk about the triumphant parts rather than this story with all of the failures of the disciples and the insults to Jesus? Well, they did this because they knew the end of the story, the glory of risen life. If God can take something this awful, this ugly, this humiliating, this senseless, and transform it into something life-giving and meaningful and beautiful, then God can certainly take the worst things I've done, or the worst things that have been done to me, or the worst misfortunes, and transform them. In God's hands, nothing is unforgivable. Everything is transformable. The liturgies that we will participate in this week are life-changing. As we gather and participate in them, we will find ourselves being a part of something that is both ancient, but also something that is new. And everything that we do this week reminds us of that. This morning we held up palms. Later in the week, the altar will be stripped. The candles will be extinguished. The cross will be venerated. The tabernacle will be emptied. The Blessed Sacrament will be moved. And the light of Christ will pierce the darkness and fill this church. It is unlike any other time in our Catholic calendar. This week, we need to take time to think deeply about what we are doing and what we are remembering. Take time to realize what this week has meant to the world. For almost 2,000 years now, we have gathered just like we are doing this morning in places like this to light candles and to chant prayers and to read again the ancient stories of our deliverance and our redemption. And because of all the calendars in all of human history, this is the one week that changed everything. Everything. This is the week that we saw the institution of the Eucharist. This is the week that we witness breathtaking betrayal and denial and torture and heartbreak and suffering and death. This is the week that would lead ultimately to resurrection. Think of all that has happened because of this week. All the martyrs, all the missionaries, saints, and servants of God who gave everything, all because of what we are about to celebrate and remember. Because of this week, the world has never been the same. This is the week that was. 7 days that shook the world. And you and me, we are evidence that the tremors have not stopped.